happy we met. But for now, I wish to introduce the host of the show, Dr. Helen Yalof.
This is the Helen I'm Happy We Met show. And I'm Dr. Helen Yalof. And I have my friend here, Ralph W. Zeitlin. He's my guest and a very interesting guy.
Well,
Hi,
hope so.
Ralph. Are you blushing?
Oh, I've given up blushing. I
Okay.
used to, but anyway.
So you know you're interesting.
Yeah, well, it's fun to be here.
It's fun to have you here.
Thank
Maybe,
you.
maybe.
Maybe not. You might be sorry. Who knows?
Probably will be.
Well,
But anyway, Ralph, you're a musician,
mhm.
and you've moved into a totally different direction, which we'll
Right.
talk about later.
Okay.
But I'd like to know, how come you became a musician? I mean, what was your early life like that led you that way?
Well, actually, but it doesn't sound like I'm on the psychiatrist's couch. Tell you
Forget
about my
psychiatry, just tell me.
when I was 3 years old, my mother took me to see the Walt Disney Fantasia.
I saw that too, I loved it.
And every single year, she had to take me back to hear it.
Well, you better tell
It is.
people what Fantasia's about. Not
Fantasia,
everybody
well,
knows
that was
it.
the famous Walt Disney. There were so many people that got it, that were exposed to classical music. Oh, it had Leopold Stokowski.
It was a big
conducting.
experimental
Oh,
cartoon
yes,
film
yes.
that had many classical musical backgrounds with
Right.
interesting cartoons,
Right.
especially the Apprentice.
Oh, the Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Sorcerer's
with
Apprentice
Mickey Mouse.
with Mickey
being-
Mouse,
Right.
yeah. That was a
Right.
very highbrow experiment at
Right.
that time.
But the thing that impressed me was here was Leopold Stokowski conducting, and he just moved his hands in the air, and all this music just came out of his fingers. That's what it looked like to me at 3 years old. Right. So, I was hooked. And I remember when I was 7 years old, and my mother said, I think it's about time to have music lessons. And I quickly, oh yeah, I want to play the trumpet. And she said, no trumpets in the house. You're going to play the clarinet. I didn't know what a clarinet was. Oh, I want a trumpet, you know. But finally she got the clarinet, and I opened the case, and here was this black ebony instrument with these silver keys, and I was all excited, and it was a lot of fun. Then we moved. I was about 7 years old at the time. We moved. I was about 10. We moved to, that was in California. We moved back east. And I started school, and I said, I'd like to I play the clarinet. And they said, we don't have any clarinets. Why don't you practice on your sister's violin until we could find you a clarinet? So it was a totally different experience. So I learned the violin. Then finally they got a clarinet.
I didn't know you could play the violin.
Oh, I could play what's called first position. I didn't get very far.
Okay.
And then when I was 12, I thought, I want to play something no one else plays. And that turned out to be the French horn. I was the only one in my whole school that played the French horn. Nobody else played it. So that started me on my life of crime and music, you know.
So where did that lead you? You also did the recorder.
Ah, yeah.
Before people did recorders,
yeah.
usually.
Well, all my life, I always had some kind of toy flute that I enjoyed playing, either a tonette or a flutophone or something. Then I heard about the recorder, which was very similar, and you can get all kinds of other things on it, more range and chromatic notes and so forth. So I became very enthused about the recorder. So.
You were also a composer?
Ah.
You left that one out.
Yep. Well, I love, you know, it's interesting. When I first started composing, I always enjoyed composing, but a friend of mine was running he was directing was it the Cape May Playhouse They were doing Macbeth, and he said, "Ralph, you're a good musician. I need some background music for Macbeth." And I thought, well, it may turn out to be trite, but it won't be wrong. I know enough music; it won't be wrong. It might be trite, and I got so involved doing it. You know, I remember doing the underscore for the dagger speech. Is this a dagger I see before me? And I got all involved in the emotion, and I'd write something down. And it surprised me when it was performed. I said, wow, there's something in there. You know, there's some music inside there. So
You also performed for the Shakespeare Festival, Pap in the Park. That was
yeah.
Romeo and Juliet, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was David Amram's
David
music.
Amram
Right.
introduced you for that.
Right. What happened, though, that was sort of a fluke. The musicians union said that unless they use one live musician, they can't use the tapes. So between the French horn and the recorder, it was perfect for Shakespeare. So that's how I got that.
And you ended up on stage, your
Yeah.
walk. You told me about your walk
Oh,
thing.
right. I had developed this walk where in Romeo and Juliet, there's a part of the three musicians. They come on stage and they came to play a wedding, and it turned out to be a funeral, of course. And I wasn't allowed to talk because I wasn't a member of Equity, but I developed this walk where, as I walked, I'd throw my leg out in front of me before I stepped, and sort of this goofy walk. And surprised that the stage manager said to me, "Boy, you've really made a character out of that." Because I love acting. I never studied acting, but it was sort of nice to get a little feedback from that.
So
Yeah.
you were with which symphony? And you played the recorder for a very big symphony.
Oh, yeah, that was Chicago Symphony.
Chicago,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. Georg Schulte.
Mhm.
They were doing the Bach's Second Brandenburg Concerto, which for many years was done on the flute, but it was originally a recorder part. And so they invited me to play, and the first rehearsal, the flute player was standing by in case I didn't work out. You know.
Oh, that's a nice feeling.
Because I was an unknown quantity for them.
you were an
know.
unknown, and doing the recorder was
Right,
unknown.
yeah. So after a few measures, Schulte turned to him and said, "Okay, you can go," to the flute player. And he was very
Make
happy.
you feel good.
He was very happy. He didn't have to play the concert, you know. So, but then I was invited on several occasions after that.
And
So-
you also led the Bogota. You were
Oh,
conductor,
yeah.
or
Yeah, I was the associate conductor
Associate
of the
conductor.
Bogota Philharmonic, La
You learned-
Filarmónica de Bogotá.
you're good at languages too.
Sort of.
Yeah. So, and then you traveled a little bit in South America leading orchestras.
Well, yeah. Well,
And then the other thing that you did is you were very into opera music.
when I was 17 years old, I was just getting practice playing the French horn in this opera company. You know, it was an amateur group. I didn't get paid for it. And there were all kinds of conductors coming through. And I asked the woman, Madame La Puma, maybe.
Madame La
you know,
Pluma.
some people may remember her. Some very famous people started there.
Yes. You'd
And,
learn your roles in those places so
right,
that you could
yeah.
do opera elsewhere because you've learned the role there.
Right. So I asked her, I said, "I'd love to conduct." And she said, "Well, we'll try you out. We'll do La Traviata." And I was all excited. And I practically memorized the whole thing. And here I was, 17, conducting my first opera. So
And then you led others. You had your own groups.
well, yeah.
Well, there was one in Connecticut, wasn't there?
Oh, well, that was more recent. That was only about maybe about 10, 15 years ago. That was the
It was your own company.
well,
right?
I was a co-founder and conductor of the Nutmeg Opera Company.
Nutmeg name of the state.
Yeah, Connecticut was called the Nutmeg State.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So no, we did. We operated for about 5 years. We did Cavalleria Rusticana, Traviata, Rigoletto. else did we do? Madame Butterfly we did.
Mm-hmm.
And one Strauss opera, I forgot which one it was, the Fledermaus. That's the one. Yeah.
Well,
that was fun.
I met you, though you didn't meet me, when I was at Brooklyn College,
Right.
because you were friendly with a group, and there were some musicians involved that were doing composing and concerts.
Right.
And somebody pointed you out to me as, oh, he's a genius. Blush, blush. And but I never did get to meet you. However, I did see you many other times afterwards and sort of followed you. So I consider you sort of an old friend, even though you didn't know me then. And the other thing is that I'm also a playwright as well as a singer, and I wrote a play about Cassandra, and you wrote the music for it.
Right.
Beautiful, beautiful music.
Well, thank you. Well, I was inspired.
Well, tell us about what you did with that.
Well, I remember the beginning, the first take you didn't like.
Oh, that's right. You did this. Your concept of what Greek music ought to be.
Yeah. Well, it was more closely related to more modern Greek music, which is somewhat Middle Eastern influenced.
Right.
You know, they all sound. And you said it sounded too much like the Sheik of Araby or something.
It did.
You know.
It did.
But what I realized was that since we have no real record of the music of the period, it's more of it's sort of like Hollywood Liberty.
It's ancient Greece, Troy. Yeah.
Right, but it's still our concept of it.
Right.
You know, and it has to have a fantasy element to it. So I just took it from there.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Well, thank you. It's interesting how I didn't have a style when I first started composing until this friend had asked me to do Macbeth for me, for him. He actually unwittingly gave me a style.
He did?
Yeah, he said, I need music for Macbeth, and it's got to sound Shakespearean, it's got to sound Scottish, it's got to sound medieval,
Gosh.
and it's got to sound modern.
Oh, Lord.
So he gave me these 4 elements, and you know, the more you limit yourself, the more freedom you have within it, in a sense, because you're pinpointing your style. So he actually gave me a style that I've used that same style. I remember I did it was the 100th anniversary of the 92nd Street Y, and they wanted a brass fanfare for the occasion. And I just used the same style, but I made it sound Jewish. I just changed a few notes here and there, but it was basically the same style.
Same music or the same style?
Same style, you know. But I altered it slightly, and that's sort of what I did with the music I wrote for you. I made it, as best I could, made it sound ancient Greek. In fact, what I did at one point was, there's a part where Cassandra...
I was thinking of that part.
Yeah, she has a vision.
She has a vision that the boats are coming to Troy that are going to be her death.
And she hears them singing.
Yes.
So I had a Greek friend who was, he not only spoke modern Greek, he knew ancient Greek, he was an historian, he was many things, Egyptologist, one of these brains, you know. And he took your poem and he translated it into a 2nd century church Greek.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't
and
know
then
this.
we took that with a Homeric dictionary.
Homeric dictionary?
Homeric from, Homer from Homer.
Oh.
And we redid it into how Homer would have done it.
You rewrote my words to how Homer would have written it?
Right, and then...
Oh, my God.
And then I just took the oldest styles I could find and combined it with whatever we knew of the ancient styles, which, of course, there was no recording. We can't know what it really sounded like. But there again, it's Hollywood license.
probably was more real
Right.
than what could have
It
been.
could have been, right?
Yeah, it sounded real to me. First of all, also what you did is you took the emotion.
Yeah.
When you say you do background music, in other words, there was various emotions, like she's seeing the moon, and all of a sudden you had a
Oh.
feeling of the moon, and
Yeah.
then she sees her death,
Well,
and you played with the emotion. It was very important in the monologue.
that's the frustrated actor in me.
And then there was the
Yeah.
sea water. So it was really beautiful.
See, what I think of when I'm doing background music, I think of myself as a supporting actor. I really want to be on stage doing all the parts, being everybody. I just love that. So the only way I can be there is through the music. So I just try to tune in as best I can.
So we met without really knowing each other. We
Yeah.
saw each other probably at parties, knew
Right.
people in common in that era.
Right.
And then we re-met when I took something called Sedona Method,
Right.
which you're going to talk more about in a different way.
Right.
And Ernie Castaldo was my teacher there, and also I started to study singing
Mm-hmm.
because it was the one thing I had failed at in the arts. And I never really studied music. And Ernie had a unique way of teaching, which built the voice. And you and I both became eventually very close to Ernie. But there was also a technique that Ernie did that you said one of your favorite instructors in music, Carmen Caruso, not the Caruso, but Carmen Caruso did.
Right.
Do you want to talk about Carmen Caruso?
Well, first of all, you mentioned the system.
Yeah.
In a brass instrument, the lips are a substitute for the vocal cords. It's the same principle. Everything else is the same. You
The
breathe.
lips are the vocal cords?
Right. Everything is relaxed except instead of the vocal cords vibrating, your lips vibrate. So there are certain basic principles. I mean, every wind player knows that it's helpful to learn to sing. And it goes the other way around. Singers are sometimes advised to learn a wind instrument.
Well, there are some famous opera singers who were flautists.
Right.
Flautists? What do you call it?
Well, you show me a flout, I'll show you a flautist. I prefer to
Okay.
call it a flutist, but
Yes, and
fine.
they build up their breath and
Yeah.
everything. They could move to singing
Yeah.
easily.
But there are certain principles of building, and an interesting thing about these principles is that they don't just apply to music. They apply to everything. They're the same principles that are used in sports or whatever you're doing, and even in more spiritual pursuits.
I found studying singing very spiritual, as it turned out.
Yeah, and it's like I remember there was one point where Carmen Caruso had given me this exercise to do, and it was just long notes, but at the end of each note, I had to have the perfect timing before I got to the next note. And you had to beat with your foot, so it was an exact time. Getting to the note A to note B had to be exactly at the right point. And he took out this giant ruler and he started banging on the table. Bam, bam. And I looked at him, I said, Carmine, my rhythm isn't good. And he said, your rhythm is perfect, but you're thinking too much. I'm trying to distract you so you stop thinking. And the light bulb went on. You just do it because, and what was I thinking? I'm thinking, well, am I breathing right? Am my lips in the right position? And when you're learning something, you don't know what to do.
No.
You just have to follow the instructions.
That's
and
what
do
I had
it
to follow Ernie, yeah.
Exactly, because we come with preconceived ideas.
Very preconceived ideas.
And this is what happens in sports also. If you're learning how to hold the tennis racket a certain way or the golf club a certain way, you can't come with preconceived ideas about it.
Well, you do have preconceived ideas, even if they're unconscious.
And that's what you have to get rid of.
Right.
And the same thing applies to spiritual pursuits. We have, God knows how many ideas of or I won't even use the word spiritual, even just psychological, in self-improvement of ourselves. The worst thing we come out with is, oh, there's something wrong with me and I have to be changed. That's a preconceived notion.
Yeah. Well, that's a negative concept of you.
Right, exactly. You have no idea where you're really at.
Well,
we have ideas, but what's that based on?
We're going to go into that in a moment. I want to
okay.
finish the music thing before we move into the other path there.
Okay.
You told me an interesting story about Carmen Caruso and the telephone call.
Oh, people called him from, first of all, you never just showed up on time for a lesson. You came an hour ahead of time.
Which happened with Ernie, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'd be sitting there with 3 or 4 people in the room while you were having your lesson, because every word out of his mouth had such wisdom that you wanted to get as much as you could. And sometimes people would call from Hollywood, or and he'd give them a lesson on the phone, and we'd all be listening.
What was the name of the guys?
Well, I think it was Al Hurt.
You said Al Hurt, yeah.
Right. Was called in for a lesson. Some of the guys in the New York Philharmonic and the Metropolitan Opera, they would all go to him when they had any problem.
And the other interesting thing that you told me about him is about the lips placement. You were worried about your lips placement.
Oh,
you had a cold or something?
There was once I was playing an exercise for him, and I played a few notes, and I stopped, and he said, "Why'd you stop?" I said, "Well, my lips weren't placed right. I want to make sure they weren't set right." And he looks at me, he says, "What's the guarantee the next time you pick up the horn it's going to be set right?" Every time you pick it up, it's another variable. You have to learn all the variables. He was trying to point out how we're trying to think and figure it all out. He said, if you just do the exercise the way it's prescribed, it will sneak into your playing by itself. And there again, that's the same principle all across the board, whether it's sports or some psychological endeavor you have.
But when I was studying singing with Ernie, I was very frustrated because I didn't have a long enough breath. I couldn't hold the notes long enough. And you came over one day for a sit-in session to watch what was going on. And Ernie had you stand up and said, "Helen," because he kept talking about your voice is built. And he said, "Your voice isn't built yet." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he had you stand up, and I felt your chest.
Well, my
the
solar plexus.
And it was like a bowl.
Yeah.
And mine was thin. And he says the intercostal muscles have to be built first before. See, and I'm sitting there saying, "I can't sing. What's wrong with me?" And he says the muscles were not built. And I said, "Aha. There's a physical thing that also has to happen." And many years later, I realized that this became larger and built.
But, people try different things like sit-ups and exercises, but there's a natural build-up when you're playing correctly or singing correctly. And I remember I had a horn teacher who was trying to show me how to breathe correctly. And he said, "I can't tell you it's this muscle, that muscle, but if you lie down on your back
your stomach goes up
and breathe normally, you'll see normally what this is. Watch a baby breathing. It's the same thing. There's a normal breath.
When I took speech at college, the teachers had us go on the desk and see the stomach went up and down when you breathed.
But imitating doesn't do it. You have to be in it yourself.
Well, we're going to talk about spiritual things very shortly. But, it's leading into, we spent the whole time on music, and now it's going to, it was wonderful talking to you again.
Okay, you
and
too.
Reviewing these things, and we're going to sometime talk more about Ernie, and I guess Carmen we've done.
Okay.
And so I'd like to thank you all for coming and being a part of our show, and I'd like to thank Ralph. Hey, Ralph, let's hold hands for being here. And I definitely would like to thank my staff here, the producer, Reverend Crystal, and John, what is your last name? Do you have?
John Gwynn.
John Gwynn, Mighty Gwynn. And they have been absolutely wonderful. And I'm so happy to be here at the studios of Manhattan Neighborhood Network, where we're doing our TV show. And I'm Helen. And you know, I'm happy that we met. I really am.